Nature Works podcast. Conversations with extraordinary guests who are working to protect, regenerate, and better understand the natural world. With your host, Mike Weeks.
Welcome to Nature Works podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing the fascinating Octavia Hopwood. Octavia is a soil microbiologist and ecologist with over a decade of experience researching real-world applications of soil biology and also making some pretty fascinating and compelling short documentaries, which is how I found her when I was doing my usual of scanning through YouTube looking for information on soil health. And it's soil health and farming and agriculture and the need for an entirely new view of how we support and enable the planet to have healthy soil. It's all of that we talk about in this episode. We also touch on the fact that Octavia, when she's not working as a microbiologist, is also a stunt woman, which is, I think, probably quite some rare mixture of career choices. Anyway, if you enjoy this episode, and why wouldn't you, because the guests are fascinating, please share with other folks who care about our planet. After all, it's the only one we've got and the only one that we can call home. We always at NatureWorks try to provide honest and unbiased insights into how we can help protect, restore and regenerate this planet. And we'll really only protect what we care about. And these conversations hopefully inspire respect, awe, and maybe even a little love for the little blue dot that we all live on. So I always start these podcasts by recording straight out of the bat, and a lot of people try to actually get on calls beforehand to introduce themselves and find out what I'm going to ask questions about. But I actually think it ruins the flow of the excitement of meeting somebody for the first time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Which this is. So for our now 2,200 listeners, and hopefully growing, we've only been around for a few months, but we're getting there fast. I actually found you, Octavia, on YouTube when I was wasting time when I should have been working, looking at videos on soil and soil microbiology. And all of a sudden I find this video with this captivating young woman walking through like some sort of, and I mean this genuinely, like a kind of David Bellamy cross. What's the lady who's the famous chef who does the very sensuous cooking? Do you know what I mean? Yes, yes. It was not David Bellamy, Dave Attenborough, by the way, not Bellamy. And so I'm sure my age there. And I was like, oh my God, this is what you want soil microbiologists to be presenting to the world as, rather than stuffy old men with glasses on and grey hair. So first of all, thank you for agreeing to be on this podcast, because I know I just cold called you or sent you a cold message. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I've watched all your videos. I've been stalking you online. But I'm going to start by asking you this question first: are there two Octavia Hopwoods? Is there the soil microbiologist and a stunt woman who does major movies, or is there only one who does both?
Yeah, that's it's a question I've actually been asking myself for a long time. How do I combine these two people? Because I did think it was kind of like almost two personas, but no, it's just there's one Octavia Hopwood and she does both, and it's something I've been wrestling with, but I've kind of come to terms with. And I think, everyone needs diversity in their life, and you've got to have some outlets for fun, you've got to have some outlets for service and passion, and that's what soil is for me. So yeah, they kind of they contradict each other sometimes, but they are both me.
So just to be clear, it was a real question, and then because I went on your Instagram and I saw your sort of car racing, and I know you're rock climbing and all that, so I assumed that you'd done your stunt. Have you got a stunt license? Are you a registered
so
stunt?
I am part of the British Stunt Register.
Yes.
Yeah, so we do a lot of film and TV. In fact, I've just come back from filming now. Last night, working on something down in London. So yeah, it's kind of a side of me that's like the more creative side, but I think that's why I really got into making the YouTube videos, was because, as you said before, soil is a lot of times about stuffiness and this old generation and maybe a slightly older way of looking at things. And I really wanted to bring like just a new wave of education and creativity to it. So
Yeah, my only criticism is there's not enough of them.
Yeah.
No, I got through them real quick and then carried on scouring, but I assume that if they're not on your own YouTube channel, then I'm not going to find any more. I've worked in TV, and I've worked in TV for a number of years, did the whole Soho thing, made a couple of TV series that were big successes, and I know what it's like in front of the camera and behind the camera, and you're an absolute natural. And I think in the domains of wildlife and conservation, and where I'd like to talk about today as well for part of this interview, farming and the likes, and soil health. I mean, there's no one really out there, it's from a youthful perspective, who is enticing people in to better understand what's going on in soils. And this interview is actually very timely. Last night I went along to a presentation by a chap called Zach Bush, who's a medical doctor and famous certainly in the US as one of the first people who started alerting the world to the health problems that come from this. Do you know who Zach Bush is? Before I go,
I've not heard of him. No,
you're not heard of him. Google him after this. But anyway, he's one of the first medical doctors who really started looking at health problems from a soil perspective, and especially looking at the data and how lots of neurodegenerative diseases in children and old people across the age ranges increased as the use of glyphosate in the soils started to increase. And so you can track almost identically the increase in all of these neurodegenerative and autoimmune diseases as we start to put these deadly chemicals into the soil. So I was watching that last night, and he was talking about how important it is to get people of a younger generation, and I'm assuming you're sort of mid-20s, are you? 24?
30, but thank you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you look remarkable for that. Okay. So you'd appeal to a younger generation. I'm an old man over here in Bali. I'm closer to 50 than I am to 40. Always forgetting where my keys are, or children, or my wife. So I'm excited to have somebody like you on here, because I'm having multiple conversations with people like, how do we get people interested in soil health at a younger generation? Because it's easy for old people like me who maybe have more of a sort of lean towards farming and agriculture and even gardening, because it tends to be an age-related activity. Younger people aren't gardening, right? Younger people aren't really thinking about it. And here in Bali, we have a critical problem, which is that there's no young farmers. Okay. Our farmers are all in their 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, and no young people want to do it. So it was for me, it was like a moment of like, oh, shit. There's actually somebody who's, I assumed you were like in your early 20s, who's credible and superb on camera, and she's doing it, but I want to see 200 of these videos.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think the problem is, soil is not sexy. And people are, we're focused. I think society is set up so we are focused very much on pursuing careers, and we've got social media that's constantly kind of telling us that we need to be these people. And I think it's taking us away a lot. As you say, in Bali, there's not enough young farmers. It's the same here. I live in Wales in the UK, and it's exactly the same story over here. I think with farming, there's just not the money in it at the moment. And that's really not drawing the younger crowd in. But from a soil perspective, I think what I've kind of boiled it down to in my research and in what I've been looking into is that we've lost kind of a connection with the earth. I think, soil, it's all very well educating people about soil, which was sort of why I started the YouTube channel alongside, I worked with a Swedish company, and we sort of joined forces and started them. But now I'm sort of thinking, well, why don't people want to look into this? And I do think it's because we've lost touch with the earth almost in every sense, in terms of a spiritual connection to the earth. We're not connected. Our hands aren't physically touching the soil anymore. So, we go to the shop and we buy our groceries. We're not relying on the soil. So I think from a spiritual point of view, we're not connected. People don't know what good soil looks like anymore. What when you stick your hand into soil, like what's it supposed to feel like? And I think, maybe a few generations back, my grandparents or great grandparents would have maybe inherently known that, but we as a younger generation don't know that. And I don't think it's any fault of anyone's. It's just the way that society has sort of led us, really. So yeah, I think it's this notion that we need love for the earth again, and we need love for our bodies. We need love for the food that we're putting into our bodies. And it's this big ecosystem and a big sort of web that all ties in nicely. But it kind of starts with caring for everything.
So I couldn't agree with you anymore. I had about 20 points where I wanted to jump in and interject that. And let's start with the fact that people have lost this connection. And of course, one of the major reasons is industrialization in cities. And you don't come into contact with dirt in the city. And if you do, you're probably rushing to clean it off. It's you go into the supermarket, if you buy carrots and they have dirt on them, most people are going to avoid those carrots with the dirt on. The carrots we get here in Bali, which come from the mountains because we can't grow them here where I am right by the sea. We have a farm here and we'll touch on that. But the carrots here, they come covered in dirt. And we give them a loose brush off, and then I give them to my kids to make sure that their immune system's getting all the benefits of some organic soil from up in the mountains. But that's our food is packaged and processed so heavily. The animals that we eat, most people who eat steaks and burgers and chickens and fish would never kill those animals, and they've never actually been in fields with them. They certainly wouldn't rear them. I mean, we have chickens here, and I struggle to kill the chickens that are meant to be for the pot, because you sort of, if you've got any kind of empathy or compassion, we kill them quickly and cleanly, and of course we'd be hypocrites not to, because otherwise we'd be buying them from the local organic butcher. So there's a real disconnect, and I don't think that is going to change any day soon. So I guess the reality is that there are small pockets of people who are doing everything they can to raise the alarm about the issues with soil. Before we get into that, though, because I've got a list here of questions in relation to that, how did you actually get into becoming a soil microbiologist? Because I saw that you grew up in Shropshire, surrounded by wildlife, and it's a beautiful part of the world. You've moved further west into Wales, have you? Where are you in Wales?
Yeah, we're right on the coast as well. We're sort of as west as you can get.
Pembrokeshire or
no,
or
Aberystwyth.
Aberystwyth. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, so you've got plenty of climate. You can go to Gogarth and all those areas around there. It's beautiful. So how did you get into soil microbiology? I mean, what compels a young woman, smart, intelligent, to get into soil microbiology instead of Instagramming, or or I don't know, go and work in the media, not as a soil microbiologist? It's quite a unique. It's not unique, but it's quite a niche field, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think I was very lucky and fortunate that my parents were a great influence on me. They're both, mad on wildlife and the environment, and sort of they're quite open to sort of curiosity. So they were always sort of, showing us things. And my dad he still does it now. He's like a 5-year-old picking up logs. But it's that like childishness that I think, we sort of lose as adults, that he has retained, and that really kind of impacted me, I think. And they also have a small holding, so I grew up with sheep and chickens and growing vegetables and stuff. And then I always grew up thinking, I want to do a career, or I want to have a career that impacts people, that has, service, that gives service to people. And, combining it with my love for the environment, I thought, I'm going to go into environmental science and become a consultant or something. And so that's what I did. And I had this amazing lecturer, Peter Abrahams at Aberystwyth University, and his research was mainly into human health and soil science. And for me, when I went to university for the first time, I didn't have any idea that soil could really impact humans in that way. And so this kind of really captivated me, and it was like this whole new subject that kind of opened up in front of me. And I started connecting like dots of, okay, so soil is, good for human health, it's good for plant health, like really it underpins everything. It's sort of like that barrier between the physical world of, this is just a lump of rock floating through space, and then the biological world that's, grown and evolved on the planet. And it's like that barrier between the two. It's a buffer, I guess. And I kind of, I was amazed by this, and it really inspired me. And I am a lover of food and growing and, having your own animals and things. And I just thought, well, I need to learn more about this from a personal point of view as well as, as a career. And so it just sort of emanated. And then years down the line, I meet this guy from Sweden. His name is Joseph Winter, and he set up a company. He's basically devoted. He bases a lot of his work on various different, Gay Brown and Elaine Ingham and people like that. But he has sort of devoted himself to finding out how can we manage soil in the best way. And he really inspired me when I worked with him. So yeah, that sort of fueled the fire even more.
I was just listening to Gabe Brown's book yesterday, actually, on audio. What is it? It's Dirt to Something or Other. Dirt to Soil, that's right, Dirt to Soil. And it's just incredible. And it just all sounds so obvious, doesn't it? Yeah, actually, it's not that it sounds obvious. It sounds so absurd that we would look at farms, and which were only 100 years ago, natural ecosystems, buzzing with life, and that we wouldn't see over a short period of time, 20, 30 years, that every time that we add chemical and synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, especially the pesticides and the herbicides, and that we start tilling the land and leaving it without a cover crop for certain periods of time, and that we're not allowing the animals to forage, and it blows my mind that people weren't able to see the sort of devastation that it was affecting, not just on the biodiversity, but also on the ability to grow crops themselves. It's like there's a blindness obviously caused by the marketing of these monoculture chemical input type, big companies like Monsanto. I can talk about Monsanto because they're not going to sue me because they don't exist anymore, but Bayer bought them up, and it's like one of the most evil companies on the planet. But have you worked in the farming industry, or what do you do as a soil microbiologist? I mean, did you go straight into TV with it?
So, I mean, I've tried everything. I'm like one of these little soil microorganisms trying to find their niche. Like, that's the analogy I can give. I've tried a bit of everything, but yeah, so I trained as a microbiologist, and I'm currently writing my thesis actually now, for my PhD. But I worked as a consultant, and we'd advise, a whole range of different projects, really. Some agricultural, we'd have a look at the soil and sort of advise on better soil practices, but also looking at soil types for creating habitats. What habitat can you create on this soil? So it was very varied, really, what I did. I don't do it as much anymore because I'm now kind of wanting to focus more on education and kind of getting this message out there. And I mean, I think a goal of mine, I would just love to farm. Like, I look at Gay Brown, I look at these farmers. There's a guy down the road that has a farm, and I love what he does, and I would love to do that. But getting into it, in the UK, house and land prices are just absolutely crazy. There's just no way someone of my age can get into it without having that background. So you kind of need to channel yourself in different ways, and that's sort of the direction that I've gone down. So I have a love for agriculture. I'm currently trying to get our university. We've got probably about 3 or 4 farms at the university, and I love the university that I work at, but they
which university is it?
Aberystwyth University in Wales.
Yeah.
They seem to have quite a conventional look, into farming, and I'm trying to persuade them to start a regenerative farm on their campus at the moment. But how that goes down, I don't know, because although it's starting, there's like a bit of momentum starting to come in the world of regenerative agriculture. I think a lot of people are still warming up to the idea, and especially the older farmers who they've got their traditions, they've got their culture, as it were, and it must be very scary for them having people come in and say, we need to do it like this, we need to do it like that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting here. The shift is starting to happen very slowly.
It's so a lot of Wales is cattle farming, isn't it? Cattle and sheep and the likes.
Yeah, sheep. There's a lot of sheep farming. All the land that's sort of the higher land, the uplands, which some of which would have had trees on it, forest. That's all sheep pasture now. And I mean, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I guess because one of the concepts of regenerative agriculture that actually surprised me was that by grazing cattle over the land, you get much more deeper carbon sequestration, because the root system reacts to the cropping or the grazing from the animal, and as the roots get deeper, they bring in more carbon. And then also you get all of the manure, and the manure is fertilizing, and all the treading and all of that sort of stuff. It's like even though sheep aren't a natural an indigenous species to somewhere like Wales, there is still a benefit to them being out there and constantly grazing over this land. I guess the issue is that with cattle farming is that you don't really have the biodiversity that you might have if you were just letting it grow again and into trees and the likes. We took on an acre of rice paddy fields here 9 months ago. Our plan is to take on another 40 acres next to it, but we're in phase 1. And we were told we would not be able to grow crops on it for quite some time because all of the rice paddies are flooded every 2, 3, 4 times a year. When they're flooded, as the waters are drained, they take all of the minerals and all of the soil components. And you'll know more about this than me, but what you get left behind is kind of a clay, because they've been doing it for 50 years, right? So most of the mineral content goes away. There's very little nutrients in the soil. More importantly, or as importantly, when the rice is harvested and the straw is left over, they don't compost it, they burn it. So you get a bit of potash, which has silica in it. But other than that, all of the carbon's burned and all the nitrogen's released and the likes. So you end up with a very depleted area of land. But anyway, we took it on, and actually our approach, because we're not a commercial farm, we don't care about how much crops we produce. The whole project is to see how quickly we can restore the soil so that we can bring back biodiversity and crop diversity and soil health. And in the last 6 months, we've been spraying microbes all over the soil. These come from a Professor Ali Zum, who's in Indonesia, Jakarta. His PhD's in microbiology. And he's patented this, it's 18 different microbes and molds. We've been spraying them all over the land, and we've been spraying them in our waterways, and we've got the Garden of Eden out there. It's gone bonkers. There's just stuff growing everywhere. And it took about 5 or 6 months for the soil, for the microbes to actually, I guess, attach enough nutrients, do enough of what the microbes do. And, in areas where we had first planted some tomatoes in the first month and they just diseased and the tomatoes were tiny and they looked terrible. Now, without any fertilizer, we haven't put any other fertilizer, we haven't put any compost on there, just the microbes. Now we cannot keep up with the amount of tomatoes that are pumping through, and they're healthy and robust. And before every single tomato had fruit flies in them. None of the tomatoes have fruit flies in them, though. And I guess that's because the microbes are enabling the plants to just take up more nutrients. They're becoming more robust, more resilient, and just way healthier. So that's only in 6 months, and that's using microbes. And so this is one of the reasons I was so excited about having a conversation with you, because I have a sort of theory that well, first of all, if the UN is correct in its assumptions that we only have 50 or plus topsoils or harvests left, I think that's probably specific to certain areas, but is indicative of the problem. Certainly within 50, 60, 70 years, if we don't fix the problem, it's just too big. And how do we do that on scale? And I'm interested to hear your thoughts. For me, it seems like if these microbes work so well, and they also can break down a lot of the chemicals in the soil, and I'm not just talking about the ones from this particular supplier, I'm talking about microbes per se, then surely that's a solution that we could be spraying over damaged lands all over the world and starting to restore in bulk, because you can use crop sprayers to spray this stuff. So you could be spraying microbes. I wonder what your thoughts are on something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the company that I worked for in Sweden, that's kind of what they do as well. They it's like giving your body a shot of probiotics. It's giving it that boost. And a lot of what humans do is, particularly in like the Western world, is treat the symptom, treat the cough or the lack of nutrients in the soil. But what we really need to do is be treating the cause. Why are there no microbes in the soil? What is going on here? So I think, it's exactly that. Put microbes into the soil. But then you've also got to create an environment where those microbes are going to thrive, because they're not there for a reason. And so I think one of the big things for me is keeping plants in the soil if you can. That's like, I think number one, like in trying to keep those microbes, because not only do those plants provide a physical stability for the soil, they're literally holding that soil. In photosynthesizing, they're producing carbon, and a lot of that carbon goes down into the soil and is feeding the microbes. So in the rhizosphere, that sort of area around the roots, you've got this little climate really where microorganisms are thriving off of sugars produced by those plants. And when I used to live in Shropshire, it's a really agricultural area. There's a lot of arable fields, and I used to drive down the road in the winter, and after a heavy rainfall, you'd get sort of flash flooding coming down off the fields and going onto the roads, and the water would be brown. And I kind of just took this for granted, as I think many people do, because it's what I've seen my whole life. But one winter, it suddenly clicked with me. I was like, why is this water is brown? Because there are particles of soil in here. This soil is literally being washed off the land. And you look up in the field and, it's just bare. It's been ploughed in the autumn or whenever. And, there's not a cover crop or a crop being planted on it. And so the soil is literally washing off, so that's where this degradation is, or partially is where it's happening, is it's literally being blown off or washed off or whatever. So I think keeping plants in the soil is kind of like the almost the key factor. Then once you've got that, then to boost it, spray on the microorganisms, spray on the microbes, and kind of and kickstart that cycle. And eventually, over time, they'll start to find their own balance. The protozoa will suddenly increase in population and start to nibble on all of the bacteria, and then they'll decline, and then it kind of equalizes itself out. I think that's something that I've found with nature, or is apparent with nature, is it finds the balance wherever it can, and the ecosystem will thrive. We just have to kind of give it that little helping hand so that those microbes can do their job. They can, extract minerals from the soil, and they can feed the plants, and they can aggregate the soil and create amazing soil structure. So it's just about giving them that helping hand.
Yeah, we see it here with so the water system here is called the Subic system, and it's a further up where the source of the Subic is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The water that comes out of the springs in the mountains here, it feeds all of the rice paddy fields for, I think it's thousands of miles of the island's not thousands of miles, but the network is over 1,000 miles of tributaries that have all been actually put in place to feed the rice paddies. But the local farmers, rightly or wrongly, they typically, if they see a single plant growing in the Subic or on the walls of the Subic, they take it out because they are concerned that it's going to take up their precious water supply. And we have this beautiful corridor that goes from our office into to our farm at the back. And within about 3 to 4 weeks, the walls of this corridor are covered in. I've used an app to look at every single plant. There's 16 different plants that grow on this wall. There's probably more, but there's 16 I've identified. But I guarantee within the next couple of weeks, I have no control over this area. The next couple of weeks, somebody will come through with herbicide, spray it, and then it just goes back to a stone wall again. Yeah. But within a week or a week and a half, boom, the plants are, even with all the herbicides that they're spraying, they're coming back. And here, because we live in a greenhouse, essentially in Bali, there's always water, there's always heat, it's always warm. You know, I've put a sweater on maybe twice in the last 2 years here.
I'm sat here with a hot water bottle on my lap. Oh, yeah. I'm very jealous.
Yeah, not trying to rub it in. I mean, you may prefer, temperate climates, but I like the tropics. But it's very obvious to see how nature's constantly trying to claw its way back, and if you just leave it alone, it's very capable of doing so.
I mean, sorry, I was just, whenever you've got an area, and I think this is another thing that, people kind of, well, not necessarily don't realize, but you add herbicides to an area or you plow an area and you're basically simulating a massive catastrophic natural event, like a landslide or a volcano eruption, a new lava field. You're taking the ground back to ground zero, and you're going to get those weeds, those first successional plants come in and habitate because that's what they do. And so, you put weed killer on, you're just going to get more weeds. So I think, you don't want to be taking it back to day zero. You want to be sort of working with nature and sort of, working with that successional phase.
Yeah, look, the most compelling part of me just learning about microbes, and let me just be clear for anyone listening, I am a complete beginner. I mean, I'm not as beginner as most people who probably don't even understand that there's microbes in the soil, but I'm a beginner in my journey of utilizing them and understanding how they work and being a big fan. But the most compelling part for me was actually reading studies that showed that microbes, given enough time, will actually break down all of the herbicides and pesticides that are sprayed in the soil, and will break them back down into component parts, and they decouple all these chains of synthetic molecules back into their elements. So that for me was like, there is because I've read the reports on, and I don't know how exaggerated they are, but on glyphosate, and now it's almost impossible anywhere in the world to not find traces of glyphosate in mother's milk. It's been tested everywhere, right? Even in the Amazon. It's like somehow, because it's windborne, and it's and so this stuff, which actually it's fresh on my mind because I went to this presentation last night, it blocks one of the very specific amino acid chains that enable amino acids to be made to reproduce cells. And that's its job, is to block amino acids. And so it does it in all mammals, humans included. But and it can last in the soil, and it can last in the food chain for tens, decades, maybe even hundreds of years. But with microbes, it gets its ass kicked, and they come in, and their channels are not blocked because the molecules are actually bigger than they are, I guess, and they're able to break this stuff down and redisperse it. So one thing I was going to ask you, and I should probably ask it at the start actually, is for the idiots listening to this, I mean myself really, and probably my closest friends, but for the uneducated, I should say, on soil, what actually is soil made of? Like, how do you define soil? Because we take it for granted, right? It's there, but What is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So soil is basically made up of soil particles, so that's mineral particles, and they are often categorized by their size. So you've got different sizes basically. Sand, silt, and clay is the common descriptive terms for those mineral particles. Then you've got water, another key component. Then you've got gases. You've got then the organic sort of matter. So this is compounds that are made by microorganisms. Or not just made by microorganisms, but they are organic molecules. So you've got things like humus and humic acids and fulvic acids. Basically, humus is like a massive sponge in a way. So it can hold on to massive amount of water and nutrients and things. So you've got those organic compounds. Then also you've got the living component of soil. So it's not just this sort of like mineral component, you know, of soil that comes from the bedrock. That's only one part. That contains like sort of your macro and micronutrients, things like magnesium or zinc, whatever, that comes from the bedrock. But then you've got this living portion, the microbes, and this is the thing that people don't realize is soil it's not a thing, it's an ecosystem. So it's like sort of the rainforest, or, you know, it's like this huge, great big underground ecosystem made up of all these little, you know, components. And microbes are a huge and quite fundamental component of soil, because they really convert that unobtainable nutrient source from the bedrock or from these tiny little particles, from the mineral particles, and they make it available for plants, who then, you know, feed the rest of the food chain. So the bacteria will decompose sort of organic material. You know, you have a carcass of something that's died, or a sort of leaf matter or whatever in the autumn, and the bacteria come and sort of chomp away at it, and they're breaking it down into those organic particles, breaking it down and then building these other organic molecules that then sort of create that structure. So when you're looking at soil, you know, and this is why I think Gabe Brown sort of titled his book Dirt to Soil, was because, you know, you can get dirt, which is the mineral particle. It's like that sort of quite light, rock solid in the summer, dusty in the rock solid or dusty or whatever in the summer, sort of block, light in color, no texture, like really dense, solid. Or on the other hand, when you start to incorporate the organic matter into it, you get this really rich, dark, chocolatey color soil, which is much more sort of crumbly and aerated, and it's got like aggregated particles in it. So yeah, that's soil. And without the microbes, it's just dirt.
I started enjoying the way you were describing all that, because it was like watching one of your videos again, where you're obviously so passionate about it, it just starts to come through it. And that was, by the way, is the reference to the Nigella Lawson. She's so passionate about food, and she puts this, it's like there's just and I'm not talking about the kind of how she's idolized as some sex symbol or something, but I'm talking about the way that food becomes emotive. And I love the way that when you're describing soil, it becomes emotive rather than just clinical. You know, like when you're talking about the honey, yeah, I could listen to you talk about it in that way for some time, to be honest. So,
well, you know, like, I think that's the thing is giving organisms like characteristics and giving them, you know, they are beings in their own right. It sounds totally hippie maybe, but, you know, once you start to think of other organisms as living beings and you really start to care for them, then you treat them like, I don't know, you know, I've got a beech tree in the garden and it's a member of the family. It's there and it's present and it changes, and, you know, so yeah, you start to notice these things.
You've just reminded me of something that I was going through a couple of weeks ago, where we dug a pond on our farm because the water that we're allowed to take is very polluted. It's had tens of miles of travel through all the rice paddy fields, but it also comes partially through the city in places, and Therefore, there's a lot of here. A lot of sewage goes directly into the Subic, which goes out into the ocean. It's a very old, out of date sewage system. Not for all of it, but there are plenty of houses that just put their wastewater and their sewage straight into the Subic. We get a lot of garbage coming down the river. We've put garbage traps in, and we pull all of that out every single day. I mean, bags and bags. I mean, big builders' bags. Excuse me, every day. And so we, on the farm, the very first task, we dug a 8x8 pond, so that we could channel the water into it. We could then clean that water ourselves using microbes, but also using plants. And so I don't know if you know much about these plants, but I am obsessed by vetiver, which is an Indian grass that is used all over the world to restore soils, because it will grow in pretty much anything, and it has a hugely deep root system, and it can go down to 15, 16 feet, even in dry. Am I preaching to the converted? No. Okay, good. Just in case you turn around and say, I did my master's in vetiver or something. So we've got vetiver everywhere. And then there's another plant that we put that in the pond, and it absorbs a huge amount of the toxins. And we also put this other plant in called water hyacinth. And we started with just a couple of these little plants. And within about a month, the entire pond, actually it's not a month, about 6 weeks, the entire pond was covered in water hyacinth. But there's no room on top of the pond. It's not getting aerated. It's actually clogging up the channel in. And so I started pulling this stuff out. But because I'd been literally from the first little plant that I put on the pond, and I'd been watching it every day and appreciating its flowers, I had this bizarre moment where I felt really guilty for pulling the water vetiver, the water hyacinth, out of the pond to dry it. And I like literally an emotional response to it, like I was killing a chicken or something, And I think part of that is because, I grew up in a city. I've spent most of my adult life in beautiful places because I was a rock climber full time for over a decade and the likes. And but never before have I actually been so connected to the land as I am on this farm, where I am putting something in the ground in its tiniest form and then watching it flourish and grow or struggle and feeling something for it. So I totally get what you're talking about with your tree. And without trying to anthropomorphize these other entities, I do think that part of the big problem with our environmental crisis is that lack of seeing ourselves as connected. And I don't mean in some woo-woo way, but we are absolutely 100% deeply connected to every species on the planet. How could we not? Mm-hmm. Right? Every breath we take has bazillions of atoms in it that a monkey in the forests of Borneo has taken recently, and all of these other remarkable kind of connective facts. So yeah, your mention of the tree reminds me of me and my water hyacinth, which now, by the way, is all completely dried, and there's about half a ton in this chicken feed. So we are utilizing it in the absolute right way. You've worked you volunteered in the British sort of wildlife reserve when you were younger, right? So different reserves.
When I was younger, I just used to take, university degrees here, I don't know what it's like over in Bali, but university degrees are a little bit of a joke, and you get your degree after 3 years, but really, a lot of the time you are spent not doing anything. So in that time, I was like, I'm going to go and volunteer for everything I can. And so I went off, and we've got loads of different reserves. I do, like you, live in a kind of a beautiful part of the world, and I wanted to spend my time doing something good, and also kind of getting experience and learning, what plants were, and because I came from a family that loved nature, but I didn't feel like I had that knowledge. So I sort of soaked it all up when I was younger, and tried to volunteer for everything that I could.
What did you do on those reserves? Because I am a absolute British wildlife nerd, and here in Bali, where actually the biodiversity, unfortunately, is not. It's good up in the mountains. You've got monkeys. There's a huge amount of snakes. In fact, one of my dogs killed a snake this morning in the garden. Usually I get to them first. Killed a small cobra. Usually I get to them first and remove them from the property, but she obviously took a disliking to it. We have 6 rescued dogs, so snakes don't last very long in our garden. But I have I'm not very nostalgic, but I am nostalgic for British wildlife. And one of my regrets, if I don't change it in my years ahead, will be that I didn't go into enough of the different wildlife reserves. I went to Slimbridge and a few places like that, like the Wildfowl Trust. But where did you volunteer?
So I volunteered at a place called Bolton Antiarian, which they are a red kite. It's the red kite feeding centre basically. But a while ago in Britain, we lost huge numbers of red kites, and it was one of the places that started bringing them back. We've got hundreds now. Like, you can't drive down the road without seeing a red kite. Yep. So that was one, and then another one was called Innis Here, which is sort of just up on the Dyfi estuary in Wales, and that's sort of like a mix of ancient oak woodland and wetland as well, and it's kind of got this amazing mosaic of different habitats. But the amazing thing in Wales is we've got these. And it's kind of what I'm doing my thesis on, actually. We've got these habitats called temperate rainforests. And they stretch all the way from Scotland, and they kind of go right down the coast. But in Wales, they're known as the Celtic rainforest. And this reserve kind of has features of those Celtic rainforests. So it's hugely diverse. You've got this ancient sort of oak woodland with tons of different flora and fauna and ground cover, and and the soil again is amazing, and then you've got the wetlands as well, so you've got birds, and I think they've introduced.
You said they range from Scotland down the coast. Where are those exactly?
So it's anywhere basically that is on sort of a westerly coast, and then the other sort of topography sort of features that they have to have is they've got to have sort of steep-sided ravines anywhere where it can sort of trap like a microclimate of humidity, moisture, warmth, anything like that. So you get these little pockets of woodland, a lot in Scotland and in Wales, and also actually down in the southwest of the country, down sort of Devon, a Dartmoor sort of area, that southwestern area.
I lived in the UK for over 20 years of my life and travelled around everywhere. Never knew that we had rainforests. Where is a temperate rainforest found globally? Look at that. It's all, and also lots of them all over Ireland as well.
They are absolutely, honestly, I would recommend going to visit. They're magical places. Not as you're not going to go and see monkeys and snakes and things, but you go and they are places, and they just feel magical. There's this real ancient connection of you can see why people, are believers in myths and legends, because these
fairies.
forests.
I'm looking at a fairy glen right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I say that loosely. There's no fairies in it. But if you sit here, this is exactly what those kind of Arthurian legends, you expect, I don't know, you expect Merlin to come walking out of these lush looking ferny. I mean, I've been to these places. I just never knew they were actually classified as temperate rainforests in the UK. What sort of wildlife are you likely to see in these places then?
From a large mammal perspective, we don't have a huge amount here, anymore. It's mostly going to be things like birds, sort of small reptiles and things. We do get, particularly in this reserve actually that I worked at, species of snakes and things. But it's mainly the plant species that is sort of the outstanding feature of this habitat, I guess. You've got ferns that are incredibly rare. You've got bryophytes and other mosses and things, and then the fungal population, because fungi are so overlooked because we literally can't see them half the time. But yeah, the fungal sort of populations are also one of the sort of the defining characteristics.
Is fungi something that you study as a microbiologist as well?
Yeah, to be honest, fungi is the main thing that I'm studying at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm a big fan of Paul Stamets. And And obviously I've seen I've watched it twice actually, the Netflix documentary, which is fantastic. Fungi, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And obviously he's big on the psychedelic use and version of them. There's a lot of, I've actually got friends here who own a company in the US that's now the first approved psychedelic or psilocybin supplier for PTSD, and the results they're getting are absolutely dramatic and remarkable. But the one thing I really enjoyed about both the Paul Stamets documentary and also some of his presentations is learning about the fact that you've got these mycelium networks under the forests and under the land that are, if you were to assume that they are one organism, they're the biggest organisms in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're tiny. They're one cell thick. These hyphae or mycelium networks.
Oh, is that right? One cell.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Oh, so you can't see them?
No, no. You can only see them in bulk. So when you get sort of a lump of wood or something that's decomposing, and you see like a sort of a white, filmy sort of fluff, almost it looks like. That's sort of thousands of strands of this mycelium network. And yeah, as you say, that they can stretch for miles. In a lot of cases they don't, but they do make up some of the sort of the biggest organisms. But the reason why they are so sort of important, and it comes down to them being so small, is they are a lot smaller than plant roots. So up to about 90% of plants rely on fungi or sort of have some symbiotic relationship with mycelium and with sort of mycorrhizal fungi. And basically the fungi are able to extract minerals and nutrients from the soil and exchange it with the plants. The plants are amazing. They're the only organisms really, well, bar a few other species, but plants are able to photosynthesize and create sugar. Fungi can't do that. Fungi, they're like us. They need to consume sugar in order to grow. So they have this amazing sort of exchange of nutrients and water for sugar. So the fact that they're so tiny, they are able to get into all the spaces that plant roots can't. And plants such as orchids, you look at the roots and they're off like that. You think, how the hell are you surviving? But it's because they're making these symbiotic connections. And, I think that's almost what we need to do. We need to remember that we're all part of this big symbiotic network. We've got thousands of fungi in us. I have to be really careful at the lab that I don't, breathe too much on any of my samples, because I'm going to be contaminating them with all of the fungi that are, in my mouth or, on my hands or whatever. So yeah, they are incredibly important.
There's an interesting theory. I don't know if it has any, how credible it is. Maybe you've come across it, and that is, and I think I saw it on the Stamets video, that fungi have hit the Earth on an asteroid or on comets or the likes. So they've come from, because there's something about their DNA that shouldn't be here. Like it doesn't fit within the mapping of anything else on the planet, and so there's this theory that they've accidentally landed here, and that they've actually been a causative factor in the diversity and the growth of life on the planet. I quite like that idea. I reckon though that it's probably arisen from somebody who's on psychedelics at the time, wondering how the hell.
Yeah. Yeah, I've not heard that actually, but I mean they definitely have, contributed, and they were one of the major factors why plants, grew in the way that they did, initially. And yeah, they're another one, you get many different types of fungi. You get the ones that sort of decompose stuff. You get the ones that, form these symbiotic relationships with plants. You earlier talking about organisms being able to break down chemicals. There are fungi that have, in fact, I think it's a variety of oyster mushroom that has been, scientists have been able to allow it to grow on on cigarette butts, and it's managed to decompose those cigarette butts. There's fungi that can sort of decompose oil, so they are absolutely incredible. And we've really not tapped into their full potential. I think this is why, it's so important to conserve these species and to make sure we don't lose any more, and, we preserve this diversity, because actually the amount of resources that we get from fungi, have really led to human civilization being here and being as prosperous and, and doing as well as we do. If you think about things like penicillin, that, has come, that is a mold, rising bread with yeast, making beer, we really do rely on fungi.
There's the stoned ape theory. Do you know that one?
I have, yeah.
I think it's Terence McKenna, isn't it, that first posited the fact that... and there's a whole book. I read this book about 25 years ago. I was probably stoned at the time. But basically that evolutionary jump that we can't seem to find the missing link for in between our very basic early human version and the current version. And he posits that by eating lots of magic mushrooms that would have been around at the time, that our brain development just super accelerated.
Yeah.
I've seen sheep in the Shetland Isles who have clearly, I've been in the Shetland Isles and filming a TV series years ago, and there were so many magic mushrooms on the floor, it was like it had snowed. I've never seen anything like it. Liberty caps, they were and there were people up in the hills with just sacks on their backs, picking these things. And I think it was before it was really criminalized as an act, because you used to be able to pick them, you just weren't allowed to eat them.
Yeah,
I think back in before it all changed. But the sheep in the Shetlands are clearly eating vast amounts of these magic mushrooms, because they're not discerning between the grass, and actually they're probably quite tasty to a sheep. But I remember setting up this base camp for this TV series we're making and looking at the sheep around us. And some of the sheep were standing there, I kid you not, for 20, 30, 40 minutes without moving. Just standing there, rocks, looking around. And I just thought that sheep's probably eaten about 2 pounds of psychedelic mushrooms, and is currently wondering how it can communicate with these strange ape-like creatures who are putting this tent up, in its field. But
in 10 years, it's their brains will end up growing, and there'll be some other stoned ape theory for sheep.
Exactly that. Exactly. So I saw you're a rock climber, you're a diver, you, as you alluded to at the start, you do stunt work as well. Yeah. How do you balance all of that then? Because you're doing a PhD. What's the PhD in?
The PhD is looking at sort of plant pathology, but sort of from a fungal perspective. So it's really sort of looking at diseases in trees and in ecosystems, particularly these Celtic rainforests, and looking at the fungal diversity and what is affecting that fungal diversity. So I'm really looking at sort of compounds from agriculture, so things like fertilizers and nitrogen, and they, as you said earlier, like they can blow on the wind. They when they go on the ground and go into the soil, they either leach off, or some of them are volatilized off, and end up sort of being deposited by rain in habitats miles away. So I'm having a look at that. But yeah, sort of balancing that then with the
is there a practical application to that afterwards? Is it purely academic, or is there something you've got a hint of usage of it for?
To be honest, actually, no. It's purely as an interest, and I really wanted to get into science again. I really wanted to sort of learn how to research properly and learn how I could get into sort of soil science. And I went for another PhD and at Rothamsted University, and that was looking at metrics of how to measure soil health, because I think that is going to be in the future something that's really going to help, I think, with farmers and with everyone managing the soil, is going to be looking at how can we measure soil health. But I had to turn it down because, actually, I didn't get it in the end. I think I argued too much in the interview because I realised that they were being funded by, some company that I did not want to be involved with. So
good for you.
I completely blew that interview because I was
how rare are modern scientists with some ethics? That's very unusual. So look, you realise how much of an anomaly you are, that you're a soil scientist doing a PhD in a field like this, and then you're also a stunt woman, right? Or a stunt person. That's a bizarre. That's a slightly odd combination. Different if you're doing stuff in your spare time, I guess. But because most people who become stunt people, that's their full-time career, isn't it? And they're not typically also sharing it between doing academia. I know a few stunt people. And back in the good old days when people used to make $100,000 a stunt, rather than now where I think it's all got a little bit more diluted. But I'm just curious because you're a mum as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I have a...
Yeah, I know that because from your Instagram or one of the when we've been doing our stalking. How do you balance all of the, how does that work being a stunt woman and an academic? And do you find that you have to have very different identities moving between them? In the same way that as a mum and as a father, you have to have a different identity moving from father into, boss and manager and all that kind of stuff. But they're quite extremes, and I wouldn't normally bring this up, but it is very odd. It's like the extreme ends of career paths.
Yeah.
Academic looking in a microscope and person jumping off of buildings and probably do you do martial arts as well and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, you have to do a martial art. So I did kung fu. I think it's a very interesting thing because it's something that I've wrestled with for a long time, is how do I balance two very different personas and characteristics? But I think what underpins it is a love for storytelling and for conveying things across to people. I love the thought of inspiring people, and I think film and TV and adrenaline kind of has this one side to it. I love adventure sports. I love being outdoors, and I mean, driving is not really associated with climate change. Well, it is associated with climate change for the wrong reasons. But I think everyone's got these personalities and these characteristics, and it's just finding ways to balance them in your life, I think. But for me, it's definitely the storytelling that underpins it all. So yeah. But it is, sometimes my partner's tearing his hair out at me because he's just what are you doing? You just pile us on. But I think it keeps life interesting and it keeps it fresh. And I can't say anything. When I had to write the biography, for this, or a little intro about myself, I'm what do I call myself? I just don't know what I am, but I'm just me, I guess. And
I would have thought though that you're a marketing man or a marketing company's dream, being combining such a physical career path with an academic career path, because typically people neglect one or the other, maybe until later years. You're a modern day Renaissance woman, aren't you? If you're doing that, do you speak 5 languages as well? You a polyglot?
Oh, I wish. No, I need to learn Welsh.
Yeah, you need to learn Welsh. Yeah.
My son's going to start speaking Welsh, and I think I need to learn before I have to help him with his homework, or we'll be doing the homework together. Yeah.
It's a remarkable language. Well, I've lived in Bali for 2.5 years, and my sound recordist and cameraman behind here, who is Indonesian, can attest to the fact that my Balinese, or rather my Indonesian, but it's remarkable, isn't it, my Indonesian, Mika? Yeah. He's nodding with a big smile on his face. Octavia, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, a real pleasure. I kind of want to dive deeper into this piece about these different careers, but it's not really where we go to on this podcast. I'm actually doing a human performance podcast as well in the coming months, and I'd love to get back on that and talk about stunt work and everything, and climbing and the likes, and more deeply how you do balance between having to have so much focus on academia and also keep yourself in such incredible shape as you need to for being a stunt person. So, but we'll save that for another conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It looks like you've got sunshine out your back window now, so not too much to complain about in Wales.
Yeah,
How cold is it? What's the temperature?
It's been -6 in the mountains, and yeah, there's a heavy frost outside. So I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna have to put some thermals on, I think.
Yeah, our air conditioning actually is a little bit turned down in here as well. So I'm going to go out and I think we're 31 degrees today. So it's actually a little bit.
Nice. Oh, I am jealous.
It's been amazing having you on. Thank you so much. We'll put all of your links to your videos, which I hope you do more. I really do. I genuinely mean that, because I showed them to my kids and they love them as well. So we'll put all the links in the show note.
Thank you so much for having
very
me.
much for your time, and we'll reach back in the future.
Awesome. Oh, thank you very much.
Take care. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.